The first time I met Pastor Jack Hayford, he told me I was ignorant. He didn't say it in a mean way. He was just stating a fact. I had been singing on a record album that Christian songwriters Jimmy and Carol Owens had written, and we were rehearsing at their home before we went into the studio. I was the only one working on the project who wasn't a Christian. Pastor Hayford came by to see how rehearsals were going, and when we took a break, Jimmy introduced me to him. The pastor immediately asked me a few questions about my relationship with God and specifically inquired as to whether I knew Jesus. I responded with a mystical spiel about how my occult practices had taught me to commune with a higher power through meditation and belief in a creative force. My New Age explanation did not impress him in the least, and he made some very direct statements about Jesus being Lord and the only way to God. I didn't buy into any of what he was telling me, and that's when he said I was ignorant. No one had ever told me I was ignorant before. In spite of having come from a miserably abusive childhood, I had for the most part gotten straight A's in school. So even though my opinion of myself was very low, at least I did not think I was ignorant. He was not at all hostile. In fact, he was careful to explain his choice of words. "You are an intelligent person, not stupid," he said. "By ignorant I mean you are unknowing of, or ignoring, what it is you need to know." His words made me feel better, but the conversation abruptly ended when it was clear I was not open to agreeing with anything he was saying. Prior to this, my only experience with people who talked about Jesus were those who yelled rudely about him on street corners and others who appeared to me to live dead and dull lives that I didn't want to emulate. Of course, my mother always talked about Jesus, but she was crazy and mean and made him sound as crazy and mean as she was. I didn't listen to any of these people because their abrasive and insensitive manner was distasteful to me. Unfortunately, I associated all Christians with them. I did notice, however, that the Christians I was singing with on these record sessions were quite different. They were loving, kind, peaceful, dynamic, and intelligent, not at all pushy or rude. I was attracted to them because of their manner. Even so, I still was not open to what Pastor Hayford had to say. In fact, I found him to be quite intimidating because he was confident, zealous, and overwhelmingly direct. I certainly didn't want to be around him again if he was going to put me on the spot with such an uncomfortable line of questioning. I fully dismissed him, and all the other Christians, as not as enlightened as I was. Never mind that they seemed happy and I was miserable. The reason I was on that recording session in the first place was because of a friend of mine named Terry. She was one of the best singers I had ever heard, and she was only 20. I was 26. I marveled how at such a young age she could pick up any sheet of music, no matter how difficult, and sight-read it perfectly with great quality and nuance in her voice. She was always the contractor on the sessions we did together, which meant she was the one who hired the singers. Not many 20-year-olds were contractors, so I had a great deal of respect for her. Terry and I had become good friends over 2 years of doing TV shows and record sessions together. She liked that I would follow her lead and blend my voice with hers instead of trying to compete with it. She talked a lot about her faith in Jesus and the church she attended, but because she wasn't in the room when I met Jack Hayford, I didn't realize he was the pastor of her church. I didn't see Pastor Hayford again until well over a year later. During that time, my life spiraled downhill. All of my fear, anxiety, hopelessness, self-hatred, and emotional pain increased to the point that I became so depressed I could hardly function. Depression was something I had suffered with for many years because I was raised by a mother who was severely mentally ill. She locked me in a closet for much of my early childhood, and that destroyed any sense of self-worth or hope I might have had for my future. Because of the pain, sadness, and despair I felt all of the time, I got into drugs, alcohol, Eastern religions, the occult, and wrong relationships to try to mask it. But these methods only brought temporary relief, and then I was pulled down even lower than before. I eventually hit rock bottom and decided life wasn't worth living anymore. I had been doing 2 TV shows a week, which meant I was working 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was insanity for anyone to do that, but I was too insecure to turn work down. I was headed for a wall and I knew it, but I didn't know how to stop. My whole life seemed like one mistake, failure, and disaster piled on top of another, and I was exhausted from trying to live as though there wasn't anything wrong. I had tried everything to find a way out of all this pain, but I had failed at that too. I seriously and meticulously planned my suicide and how I could make it look like an accidental drug overdose so my sister and father wouldn't be hurt by it. I thought my mother would probably be relieved. When one of my TV shows ended for the season, Terry called me to sing on another record session. While we were sitting next to each other on a break, I shared some of what I was feeling with her. I didn't mention the suicide part, however. Even at this desperate time in my life, I still didn't want anyone to know about my secret plans. "I can see you are not doing well," Terry said. "Why don't you come with me and meet my pastor? He is amazing, and I know he can help you." She had been telling me more and more about her faith in God every time we were together, but she did it in such a gentle and appealing way that I wasn't put off by it. In fact, I was attracted to the lifestyle she embraced. She seemed to always be full of life, purpose, and clarity, and totally without the condemnation and self-judgment that was so crippling to me. But I still considered myself too educated and intellectual to actually believe something so absurd as what she was talking about. She said that a man named Jesus, who called himself the Son of God, died for me so that all my sins could be erased and I would have eternal life with him. Yeah, sure, I thought to myself. And where do Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny come in? Right after the Tooth Fairy, perhaps? Even though it seemed to me that Terry and the others on the recording sessions had rather quaint and unenlightened beliefs, I recognized that they were certainly nice people and they had a distinctly pure, simple, sweet, loving, and uncomplicated spirit about them. If only I could fall for something so outlandish and my brain could be as numb to stark reality as theirs, I thought. As bad off as I was at that moment, I still hesitated to respond positively to Terry's request. But this time she pushed me harder on the subject than she had ever done before. "What have you got to lose, Stormy?" she asked with urgency in her voice. "Just come meet him." I paused for a momentary look in the mirror of my life, and what I saw looking back at me was shockingly fragile and dark. Was I on the brink of self-destruction and still refusing a hand that could possibly pull me out of the quicksand into which I was sinking? Realizing that I had nothing to lose because I had nothing to start with, I finally said, "Okay, I'll go meet him." Terry made arrangements to pick me up at my house a few days later and take me to meet her pastor at a popular restaurant nearby. She was astute enough to not trust me to get there on my own. When we arrived, he was already waiting for us at a table. "This is Jack Hayford," she said as she introduced us. "But everyone calls him Pastor Jack." He extended his hand warmly and smiled, and I did the same. I thought he seemed familiar, but I didn't recall that earlier meeting, and apparently he didn't either. In fact, I would not remember that this was the same man until well over a year later. After the waitress took our order, Pastor Jack asked me a few questions about myself. I was beyond the point of trying to put up a good front, so I shared with him how I was feeling. Of course, I left out the part about my suicide plans and my crazy mother. It would be a long time before I would ever reveal anything to anyone about either of those things. I told him I'd had a hard time getting up that morning because of my severe depression, which had become a daily, gut-wrenching battle. I had put in 16 hard hours at CBS Studios the previous day night taping the Glenn Campbell show, where I worked as a singer, dancer, and actress. I was exhausted and discouraged and willing to hear anything that sounded like a reason to live. When Pastor Jack talked about the Lord, I hung on every word. Right away I had this vague sensation of hope, even though it was very foreign to me. The three of us ate and talked for nearly 2 hours, and then he asked Terry to drive me to his office at the church so he could give me 3 books. "Read these and come by the office next week to tell me what you think about them," he instructed me kindly. I said I would and secretly postponed my suicide plans another week. That same day,